Well, thank you, Austin. That was very good, very informative. They asked me to do the moderation here, and I agreed to do so. I said, however, I'm not very, frankly, sometimes very good with names, so I apologize if I get that messed up or if I refer to you as the person in the blue shirt, just so I don't mess it up. But now we'll open up the floor for questions. So, Brother Melvin.
Appreciate your talk very much. Well presented. Just a couple of things I might mention. When he says provoke one another into love, stirring one another up and provoking one another into love to good works, I think that's certainly that's a major reason we assemble, really, to stir one another up and encourage one another. So that's the reason it's important for all Christians to be in the assembly to do that. One thing I would like to ask you about, for years I kind of took the position that as you see the day approaching was the judgment day. But when you think about that, or when I think about it, I've had this pointed out to me over the years, he was writing to Hebrew Christians in that particular context, and they were under persecution even at that time. It's one of the reasons they were inclined to forsake the assembly, some of them. And I think they could see probably the logical things about to take place, maybe the destruction of Jerusalem approaching. And so for that reason, among others, I've kind of leaned toward that, as you see the day approaching, really referring, as far as they were concerned, to the destruction of Jerusalem. And for one thing, we can't see the day of judgment approaching because we don't know when that day is going to be. Not even Christ knows that. So I really think that probably refers to the destruction of Jerusalem in that particular passage. I'd be glad to hear your comments about that.
So I think I've went back and forth on this as well, as I kind of alluded to. And so there was a time when I thought destruction of Jerusalem as well. And there's a few different things that make one lean that direction. For one, I believe it's at the end of chapter 8 in Hebrews, it talks about how the old covenant was fading away, indicating that there was a coming time when that was going to cease. And we know that would a definitive moment of that was AD 70. Another aspect of that would be, like you said, the general context of the book, what they were encountering. And then a third argument that I could think of is at the end of Hebrews chapter 10, the quotation from the prophecy. If I remember right in my study, it was a prophecy about the first destruction of Jerusalem that he's then using again. And so indicating possibly a connection to the coming of the destruction of Jerusalem again. The reason I hesitate to take that, and also what you said as well, we can't see when the day of the Lord is approaching, as opposed, or the second advent of Christ, the second coming. We don't know when that date is. And there were indications given about the destruction of Jerusalem in Matthew 24. The reason I lean a little bit more towards Day of Judgment is because of some of the passages that we looked at here. So, for example, I didn't read. So Romans chapter 13 and verse 12 is one of those passages. And it says there that the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore, let us cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the day. Verse 11, and do this knowing the time that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. And so, from that context, and there's a few other passages, it could be a reference to that general statement that our salvation is nearer, that the day is approaching. In one way or another, it's closer the next Sunday than it was the Sunday prior. And in the immediate context, verse 23 in particular talks about holding fast our confession and eternal reward in the verses following, and also the strictness of the judgment of the Lord, and that there is no more sacrifice for sins. I tend to think Day of Judgment, but I would not be opposed necessarily to destruction of Jerusalem. That's just my personal opinion.
My question is about possible exceptions and Matthew 5, verses 23 through 24. So in Matthew 5, Jesus says, "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift." So here we have an example of Jesus saying you should interrupt an important ritual to make amends with your brother. So my question is, for church services, that's an important ritual, but should we interrupt those to make amends with our brethren?
I think you and I had a conversation about this before. I should have seen this coming. That's a really good question, and I think there's a couple different ways that you could take it. For one, what it's describing there, of course, when it talks about leaving your gift at the altar, that would be the Old Testament system, right? And particularly when you're talking about a gift, there wasn't a time frame on the gift either. There wasn't an appointment. If you're offering a gift, I would almost consider that may be a free will offering. I haven't looked up the commentators on what they would say that the gift was. So there isn't a time frame placed upon that, and so there's almost an apples to oranges comparison. However, the principle, what we'll get at, and will address, I could just leave it, it's just totally different. But the principle behind that is, if there's something against you, that your brother has against you, or you have against your brother, as we see in other passages, that you were supposed to go and take care of that because that affects how you worship, right? And so, to this, I would actually say a 1 Corinthians 11 passage. In 1 Corinthians 11, verse 27, it says, "Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. And for this reason many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. Therefore, my brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another." And so on and so forth. And so the principle behind that is that if you are doing something in an unworthy manner, it affects, if you are examining yourself truly and you find yourself lacking and you go ahead with it anyway, the Lord's going to judge that. And so the important thing to do, I don't think, is to miss services in order to do that, but it is prior to services, make sure you get it done, you get it out of the way. This is more along the lines of Paul's instruction in Ephesians chapter 4, do not let the sun go down upon your wrath. If you have something, take care of it as soon as you possibly can, because your worship is in jeopardy of that. And I would hesitate to say that would be an exception. And if someone comes along and says, well, I wasn't at services because, I'm still angry with my brother, I'd say, why didn't you take care of that a little bit earlier? To me, that's the principle is good, that we need to take care of it, but the practice of avoiding worship because of it, I think, is suspicious.
Hey, Brother Austin, I thought that was excellent. Appreciate what you said. My question is just something that I think has come up in recent years among our brethren is who our worship services geared towards. In particular, if it should really be geared towards visitors. Now, you read from 1 Corinthians 14. In verse 23, it says, "Therefore, if the whole church comes together in one place and all speak with tongues, and there come in those who are uninformed or unbelievers, will they not say that you are out of your mind?" That would tell me that at least an aspect of our worship should be geared toward those who come in. At the same time, I do struggle with, as I think many people do, with things like the invitation song and the invitation. I'm not opposed to them, but I can see how somebody would be. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. This conversation is kind of along the lines of man-made traditions, right? The invitation song is kind of a prime example of that. Or if you want to look at the, 4 songs and a prayer pattern, we made that up. There is nothing in the Bible that says that you have to do it that way. And I think as a brotherhood, we are pretty respectful of that, because there are some churches that, have 3 songs, or they have the communion at the beginning of services, or something of that nature. And we may say, well, they're a little weird, but we don't say that they're wrong, right? And so, I think if someone has a problem, if you don't do it, that's a red flag. At the same time, there's an allowance, I think, for, it's always good to invite people to obey the gospel. Or another important aspect of what we do is we invite brethren who may be in sin to recognize that sin. We offer an opportunity to pray for them. Now, again, there's nothing in the Bible that commands that we have to do that. But to Cole's question, it's a built-in time that we allow. If someone has something on their mind, they recognize that something is wrong, that we can pray with them and for them right there and have it corrected. And so there's good that can come out of it. I have a similar question about invitation songs themselves. Ephesians 5:19 says that we're to sing to one another. Invitation songs are not sung to one another. They are sung to those outside the church, bidding them to come. How do we reconcile that? I have some questions about that myself. I do think there's an aspect of services that should be geared towards the outsider, because he instructs them to alter how they do worship. Don't do it in tongues, because they're going to say that you're mad, or that tongues aren't as effective, but prophecy is more effective. And as a result, the observer is going to glorify God because of what he witnesses, because of what he sees. I think that we should be mindful of that. We should be mindful of that in our teaching and in how we order and construct services. How the songs that we lead, I think, are important to that as well. But I think the topic of man-made traditions, where they come from, is an interesting one, and I think it needs more consideration. I don't have a great answer right now, but I think it's something we need to examine further.
So you mentioned part of the rules of the assembly is one speaker at a time. How does that apply to translations, like live translations of a lesson?
Answering this question, I'm a little out of my depth, because I've never been involved in that type of service. I've never been in a bilingual service. And so what I always kind of assumed happened was that one person spoke and then the other person would translate. To me, I think that would be more ideal, and something that maybe some consideration should take place. But I think, if I'm understanding you right, again, I haven't experienced it, but the translation may happen as the other person is speaking. Is that what sometimes happens? Okay. That's for expediency's sake. That's for speed. And I think when we come together, we don't worry about speed. And so I would pump the brakes on that a little bit. If it were me, I would probably say we need to speak one at a time and slow it down a little bit and be okay with that. But that is an opinion. And I think, according to 1 Corinthians 14, I think that aligns a lot better. It's less chaotic. But that's an opinion. Good question.
Great presentation, Austin. Appreciated it. Obviously, in your lesson, almost everything that you said would be contentious in the religious world, right? But I want to give you the chance to elaborate on 1 Corinthians 14, 34 through 35, because that's an issue that's also contentious in the religious world, but massively contentious in just the world today. So if you would just elaborate on, I think you said it's not an inferiority or superiority thing, and just talk
Right.
on that.
So the parallel passage, if you want to call it such, is over in 1 Timothy chapter 2, if I remember right. And so in 1 Timothy chapter 2, we'll read that as well. It says, "Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control." I couple these together because I do think that they're talking about the assembly, or at least that the assembly is implicitly stated. And the reasons, the important thing for us to remember in the modern day is that, again, it has nothing to do with inferiority or superiority. But Paul is linking it, he links it actually to two things. He links it to the creation order and what happened at creation, and he links it to what the law says, as also the law says there in verse 34. And he gives them plenty of opportunities in other passages that they can and should teach, but not in the public assembly. That's the only caveat that he makes there. They are commanded to teach the younger women in Titus chapter 2. Women have been, in the New Testament, huge parts of the gospel being spread. Paul refers to Aquila and Priscilla as those who risk their own necks. It's really hard to risk your own neck if you never say anything. There's things that women have done that are incredible in the scriptures, and they teach in their role. And in their role, that has nothing to do with inferiority or superiority. As we're discussing in Galatians chapter 3, you're all made one in Christ Jesus. And what people often try to do with these passages, the religious world in particular, even the ones that say that they are very conservative, first, which I think is very egregious, they try to dismiss altogether the book of 1 Timothy. They say that the entire book of 1 Timothy may have not even been written by Paul at all, that it was a forgery. That's not true. That's an egregious claim. The next, they look at this passage and then they say, well, this is all cultural. This has nothing to do with anything. Then they'll turn to Galatians chapter 3 and says, well, all gender roles have been dismissed because Christ has come onto the scene. That's not what any of these passages say. And when we start going down these rabbit holes, there are some that are more in love with the idea of feminism than they are with the biblical pattern. The biblical pattern does not diminish. It complements in the roles that they have. And so this particular passage there is important. And it concludes with, it is shameful for women to speak in church. There is a shame that is put upon it because, well, simply because he says that there is. And that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some women who are excellent orators, and that could give a very good lesson. But that's not for me or any human being to say that that's okay for them to do. Just because you're good at something does not make it okay for you to do.
In the passage, in the Corinthian passage, it says, but they're commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. Now, the law there is the law that emanated from creation. That's not the law of Moses. Now, doesn't that kind of connect with what it says there in Timothy about the woman is to be in silence, or that she's to learn in silence with all subjection, and that this stems back to creation and the penalty that was placed on the woman there as opposed to the man's role. The man was to be in one position, the woman in another. I think that all connects those two passages in that way when it talks about as the law also hath, also saith the law. So I think that kind of connects with what the Timothy passage.
Yeah, well put. Yeah. And I think for those who try to take the scholarly approach and dismiss the book of 1 Timothy altogether, I think they run into a real problem, because no one yet that I know of has dismissed 1 Corinthians as legitimate. And so you still have to deal with that. And I think to your point that, yeah, they coincide well.
In a bygone era, there was a lot of controversy about the Bible classes and Sunday school and what have you. And in the process of forging out all of those issues, one thing that was vitally key to that issue was specifying or defining at what point the rules of the assembly apply. Every get-together or gathering of Christians is not necessarily a, quote, church assembly. So when do those rules apply? Or I'll just throw that as a general question. Could you just comment a little bit about, what constitutes an actual assembly where the rules apply?
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of discussion about that. I think there's a principle that may be taken out of context that comes from Matthew chapter 18, where it says, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. That passage, it comes right on the heels of talking about a withdrawal of fellowship, and it is not in the context of the assembly. And so some have taken that and they have jacked it up to the extreme to say where 2 or 3 Christians are, that's an assembly. To me, when I read the scriptures that talk about assemblies, such as James chapter 2, I think is a fantastic verse that describes a gathering that takes place and people coming in. To Chaz's point earlier, you have visitors that come in, for example. These are things that are known to be assemblies of the church. And so this is going to sound lame, but I think it holds up. A church assembly is whatever we call a church assembly. And so if we say that, and we're operating here under the rules of the assembly, this is something that is announced to the public that this is an assembly of the church. This is a public event. We've sent flyers. We've put things online. An assembly is a calling together that is open to members and outsiders, and that happens at a specific point in time, and it starts when the assembly is called to order. These are things that are implicit in the word assembly, in the whole notion of what an assembly is. And so the issue with Bible classes, my main issue with it, is the fact that it is public. Nearly every sign that talks about Bible classes, it has it in very bold print: Bible study, Sunday school, they're synonymous terms in my book, happens at such and such a time. And there are various scatterings of people by age or group or position in life. And then they all come together in one place for a different assembly. The one where they all come together in one place, that's biblical. That's what the Bible describes. That is an assembly. But when you announce it to the public that we're all going to come together and divide, that's not an assembly. Well, that is an assembly, and you're breaking the rules, the scriptural rules of what an assembly is, and the rules that they're supposed to be governed by. To me, that has always been the point to me that makes the most sense. I don't know if it does to you, but that's
yes,
my thought.
The divided assembly is not a biblical assembly.
Correct.
But a public assembly where the church is called together for the purpose of rendering spiritual service to God is a public assembly. And the rules of the assembly, or the regulations, or whatever term you prefer, from 1 Corinthians and here and there elsewhere apply.
Agreed.